Thank you very much for sticking around here to the very, very last session. I hope I'm going to end it with a blast for you. Yeah, sure. It was an interesting session to put together because I was kind of thinking that could be an audience full of people that knew everything about Power Apps and solution management, which is pretty critical to doing anything around ALM on the platform. Or it could be a bunch of Azure DevOps ninjas that wanted to understand how to do DevOps specifically for Power Apps. So I tried to hit a balance, but I'm curious how many already knows about the Power Platform? Okay. And how many knows about solution management and are really good at that? Okay, so about half of you. Because there is something really interesting around doing DevOps on the Power Platform. There's kind of this big gap between citizen developers / makers, whatever we decide to call them today, but the people that do not do any development and do not know what source control is, nor do they know why they should care about it. They definitely don't know what a repo is or an Azure DevOps pipeline. And then you got the developers that when they're introduced to a project where you're implementing Power Apps or Flow or these other things, there are a bunch of things that they expect will just be there, except they're not. So the great thing about what I'm doing in the team I'm in now is that I get to address it. The sad thing is that when I'm done, it looks exactly like a professional developer would expect it to be. So it'll be like, well, what did you do? Of course it looks like that, but that's okay. I'm fine with that. So by way of introductions, I've been doing Microsoft CRM, and it was still called Microsoft CRM. I've been running SIs and ISVs, and there was always this one thing that really annoyed me was that you could really configure all these things, you could do all these things, and we kept piling on features, but no one really took it seriously on how we could actually go ahead and deploy these things in a structured manner. How could we from Visual Studio or from a repo harvest what a maker is actually doing? Because what happens very often is that we want these apps to go viral, and these citizen developers can do all kinds of magic now by just point and click. If any of you saw Steven's session on Flow, right? It's incredible what you can do today. So it means you can also do a lot of damage, obviously, that these guys couldn't do before, but now they can do all this damage, and they don't know what source control is, and they can share it. So we've kept piling on these features. By the way, I had a much better graphic than that one, but they took it out. I wasn't allowed to use it, so I found another one. But basically, we've been piling on features, but we've never put this wagon together or told them that, hey, you can use the wheel. Or if we did tell them you could use the wheel, we sort of gave them pieces of that wheel, but never one thing saying, go do this, right? So fortunately, with the help of people like Donovan Brown, who's an evangelist for Azure DevOps, and a general push towards DevOps, organizations are much more focused around putting structure behind this chaos that the citizen developers of the world are suddenly introducing to a world that for developers was perfectly fine until they came along. So we get asked all the time, right? We don't get asked so much about new features. We get asked about, well, that's fine, but how do I do CI, CD? How do I structure this? I have all these makers, they build apps, and sometimes they share them, and they share them with a connector in it that connects to my ERP system, and now I'm completely losing control. So we have to come up with a way where you can sort of move from these individual, let's call them personal productivity tools that makers can build, to a point where we can grab it when we realize they start sharing an app and it starts going viral. Then we need to be able to harvest what it is they do, put source control behind it, but without limiting them from doing awesome things, because we do want them to build great stuff. But we also want to make sure that we can, that developers can be hooked into that loop, because what happens is you start by configuring an app, and then you add a flow to it, and then you suddenly want to do something that requires some code, so you go down to a developer, and you give him or her a solution, and say, here's my solution, and the developer goes, but where's the repo? Why are you giving me this zip file? And what is this zip file? And why do I have to use another tool to get that zip file into a format that my source control can understand? So that's what we're focusing on in the team. And like I said, it's super exciting, and I'm going to show a little sneak peek on some of the things that we're doing in the demo towards the end. So what to expect from here is, like I said, there are a bunch of things that you need to have in place before you can even start thinking about CI/CD. And those are what I call the fundamentals, and I'll go through them because they're important and because they're not always followed. It's kind of preaching what we've been saying for a long time, but the platform hasn't really been able to support what we wanted it to do until now. So I'll talk about managed versus unmanaged solution, and then I'll share some new features that's coming to solution systems to support a more healthy ALM story. Then I'm going to do a demo, which is probably might be what you're here for anyway. So the fundamentals is managed versus unmanaged. There's been so many debates around that because it used to be difficult to work with managed solutions. So there are a lot of still SIs and partners and customers, even a few MVPs that will still insist that customers should not use managed solutions because it's really difficult. But it's not really difficult, it just puts some demand on a certain level of structure on how you do things. So you can read that at your leisure, the deck is online, but managed should always be used in any downstream environments, and unmanaged should be used only ever in development and to move what you're building into source control. It should never be used for anything else. And in a production environment, there should never be anything but managed solutions. And we're doing a few other initiatives to make sure that that can actually happen, like the ability for a tenant admin to turn off the ability to add anything other than managed solutions into an environment. But we're not going to do that quite yet. Folks need a little time to adopt the new mindset of that. So we got this health check that you should ask yourself or the customers you're supporting. Is source the definitive truth of what you're building? And most of the time when we ask the question at first, they say, yeah, of course it is. And then we ask them, is that just your plugins and your PCF controls, but not your solutions? And they go, yeah, the solution files, we export them, zip them up, and then we put them into source control. So that's not what we mean. That's why the bottom question is a trick question. Are you shipping as managed? I just talked about that. Are your dev environments disposable? You should really make sure that your development environment, they live the shortest time possible, because they tend to get contaminated by other solutions or like little test things that you do. And that's another thing about our initiative here, is that we also want to make it faster, and we want to enable you to spin up and spin down these environments on demand quickly and have any dependencies pre-deployed to those environments as well. If you have 100% automated ALM, can you guarantee that you will never do anything manually in your production environment? Does your developers work in isolation or not? Again, this has to do with this cross-contamination that can happen in the solution system. Once you start working in the same solutions, in the same environment, all kinds of bad things can happen that shouldn't happen. Can you service production while you're working on vNext? That has more to do with branching and whether you're actually using source control as well. And then the trick question is, are you using solution packager? Because if you're not using solution packager and you say that your source control is the absolute source of truth, then it's not true. You're actually not using source control. So those are the ALM health check Then we got the solution check. Are you using solution segmentation? Funny enough, before I joined Microsoft, which is fairly recent, I actually didn't know what solution segmentation was, but it was just because I didn't know the term. But for anyone who's been on the platform for a while will know that it used to be so that when you added an entity to a solution, you couldn't choose what to add. I think that was here in 2011 or something. With solution segmentation, you can say, well, I only want this field, and I only want that relationship, and I only want that form, which again is super important that you only take what you need, so you don't start messing with some of the other things. And it keeps the size of your solutions down, so it does faster import, faster export. That's just a lot of good things to be said about it. Do you only use supported techniques? It's been harder to not do that when everything is online, but there are still hacks that you can do. Are you testing in the unified client, and are you using app modules? Does everybody know, who knows what the unified client is? Okay. So there is something called let's call it the traditional UI, the web UI, which is what's been around for a very long time. And then there's something that's been introduced a while back now called the unified client interface, which is a much more modern look and feel. It's more responsive, and it requires you to basically build these apps. And the reason why you should really test it, even if you're using the web UI, is there will come a point in time where the UCI will be the default experience. So if you build in the web UI only, you don't know what your users, customers are going to end up experiencing. So you should test that as well. Using a single publisher. Not everyone's doing that. Some don't even know that there is something called a publisher, because we make it increasingly hard to find out where it is. We're trying to give people fewer tools to shoot themselves in the foot. And one of the things is around the single publisher. We made it even more difficult with CDS, because we have a CDS default publisher and we have a default publisher for CRM. So you kind of like have to know to go in and change those, but we want to make that part of the default experience. So just like you set the default currency, you should really just set the publisher, done and over with, so you don't get any more new underscore fields and all these different things that. Are you using Solution Checker? Who knows, how many knows what Solution Checker is? Yeah. That's not a lot. If there's one thing you need to go back and do today, just one thing, promise me to go back and use Solution Checker. Solution Checker is an embedded experience inside the Maker portal today that you can actually click on. I should have had a demo for that as well, but I got too many things to show and tell. But anyway, search for it, Solution Checker, run it against your solution. It's going to tell you whether you have any bad practices, whether you're doing silly things on your forms and your plugins. It's a static analysis tool that tells you the health of your solution. And the result you get out of it can really improve performance as well. So please go back and run that. On the ALM side, we're actually going to introduce Azure DevOps tasks that you can use in your build pipeline that automatically runs additional rules, which is going to be really nice. And I are using separate environments for each solution. Again, this goes back to this issue with cross-contamination. And do you only have your managed dependencies installed? Right? That's a really important piece, that you shouldn't have field service, sales, 3 different ISV apps installed on your development box, unless you have components in your app that depends on those. Because otherwise you're going to carry forward all these different dependencies. So keep it to a minimum. So what's coming for solutions to make things better for you? We're going to bring out environment variables, which is basically a way for you, instead of having to go in and update, let's say, the connector information in your production environment manually and in your test environment, these different places, they actually become solution aware, so you can define them as part of the solution, so that will travel throughout your different environments as you go through, so you don't need to have any hands-on. Those are some of the gaps that we've had on our ALM story, is that there were still a few things you had to go in and tweak manually in the environment, which was a big issue for the financial industry, because they have very strict requirements that you just don't do anything manually in your production environment. We're bringing in custom connectors. We're bringing in solution checker. I mentioned that before. I won't talk more about that. And then we're adding the ability to add non-solution aware canvas apps and flows. They weren't solution aware. You couldn't have them in a solution previously. Now you can, but if you have anything left over, we have a script that you can run so you get them into a solution. And we're adding dependencies for canvas apps and flows as well. On the solution framework, solution history is a great thing we're bringing in, so you can actually go in and see what was imported, what failed to import, who imported it, what was the errors when it was imported. So you actually have that full history that we've been lacking for a mighty long time. Solution layering, that one is a magic one, if you ask me. It's basically the ability how many knows what solution layering is? Okay, I should probably have brought a slide on that. But when you import different solutions, they layer on top of each other, right? So that means if I have solution 1, 2, 3, solution 3 is the last one that came in. If I make an update to a field that's used in solution 3, if I make an update in solution 1 and create an update, that's not going to apply because solution 3 is on top of it, right? So the fact that you can now see that solution layering, hopefully is going to teach more people that there is a concept of solution layering, and it's going to tell you exactly where something sits in that different layer. So it's easier for you to troubleshoot dependencies when something won't import, and it's easier for you to troubleshoot why a certain customization or configuration doesn't show in what you're building. And then another, this is in my category of magic button, undue managed customizations. It's a high risk one for some production environments, but it's much needed to get everyone back to a healthy state. So those are some of the things, but then it still goes back to like, but how does that really help? Because we're still in this reality of isolated solutions, and how does it help when the reality is actually this, which is some of the partner quotes that we gathered, and they were all saying the same thing, like the platform is fantastic, we love building on the platform, but why do you make it so difficult for us to like put up continuous integration, continuous deployments? Why do we need to go to 7 different places to download the tools and 3 different portals to build versus manage? We have to do all these difficult things. So if nothing else, like we're aware of that, and we're working super hard on fixing it, because what we want to get to is we want to go from, I call it build your own ALM to easy buttons. Really just want to make it simple. And some of the ways, or let's call it phase 1 of what we're doing on that, is that we're going to make it really, really easy to do your ALM through Azure DevOps. It's going to serve different purposes. One is that if you know a lot about Azure DevOps, you can actually set this up for your PowerApps, for your Power Platform applications, without having to learn about 7 other tools or anything else, right? So it's also going to serve as a sort of framework for us to talk about ALM, because this is also going to come with very prescriptive guidance of what you should be doing, because reality is that people that are really, 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 really good at Azure DevOps will still find it incredibly hard to do proper ALM on the Power Platform without some guidance of what they should be doing, because what we do is an odd concept. So we want to make sure that if you know what you're doing on Azure DevOps, we provide these things as individual Azure DevOps tasks that you can consume in your pipeline, but we're also going to ship some sample pipelines of this is your sample pipeline for harvesting changes from a maker. This is your sample pipeline for deploying something to a test environment. So we're going to ship all these different sample pipelines as well, pre-configured with the Azure DevOps task that we're doing. So effectively what we do is we take all our tools and we take all our scripts and we wrap them up into nice, digestible Azure DevOps tasks that you can just consume. So we believe that we've had very positive feedback on it, and it should make it really straightforward. So we really want to get to a point where it takes no more than, say, 5 minutes to actually drop DevOps on my Power Platform deployments, which we're very excited about. Demo time. Let's do this. So what I want to do is I want to show how. Let's open up here. That was too soon, wasn't it? I didn't tell you what I was going to do, because I tried to multitask. I'm going to try and demo a scenario where you have all these different makers building all their apps. Some are good, some are bad, and you want to harvest them. You want to harvest a solution. You want to bring it into source control, and then just to demo the next step of that, I'm also going to then make a change to some of that in Visual Studio, and then bring that into that same environment. So let's try and do that. And like I said, this is also a sneak peek of what we're gonna ship. So I could start building my app different places in PowerApps.com, and this goes back to we want to make it simpler. We want to not have so many different portals to go into. So eventually we're going to have parity between what we call the classic Solution Explorer, which is over here, and the modern Solution Explorer. I'm going to show it in the classic Solution Explorer because there are a couple of things that I want to show that we haven't quite moved into the new one yet. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start by creating a solution, because I'm a maker, but I'm a maker that knows at least that you have to do it in a solution. So I'm going to call it build 19 demo. I did set up a publisher to begin with. I'm going to do this. I'm going to save it. And then I'm going to decide I'm building an app. So the demo here is not about building an app, so I'm going to make it super, super simple. But I just thought I'd add it in case no one had actually built an app before. So let's call it build 19 demo. I'm going to create that. I'm going to configure my sitemap. This is my new area. I don't need to select an icon. I don't need to change the ID, because this is not about creating the app. It's really just about getting a solution. I'm going to give it a title. This is always fun. Let's do that again. Let's do that again. Group 1, title. I'm going to add a sub area. Come on. We still have work to do. I'm going to select an entity. Who in here has never built or seen an app being built before? Okay, there are a couple. So this is basically just a way for me to wrap existing components that exist in on the app here. It's just to wrap that into an app that has a navigation experience that I define. But I could, of course, also add additional entities, additional fields, additional forms, different flows. I could do all kinds of magic things, and that's typically what people should be doing. Here, I'm really just building a super quick one, just to illustrate this concept of makers building an app and then using Azure DevOps to harvest that and get that into source control. I'm going to save that. Let's go back to the app designer. I'm going to save it. Validate it. One warning, I don't think that matters. I don't have a default dashboard, that's fine. So I'm going to go ahead and publish this one. Right? So now I have an app in my solution. Then maybe, just for laughs and giggles, maybe I also want to have an entity added outside of that. So I can add an existing entity here. And this is where we come to this concept of solution segmentation. where if I add a count here as an entity, I get to select exactly what I want from that. Now, like I said, we make it really easy for everybody to shoot yourself in the foot because we default things like include entity metadata that can do some real damage when you deploy that. So like, what I'm trying to say is that we're aware of all these different little places where we need to optimize, so we track all of them amongst those, right? You don't default this to include entity metadata. Like effectively, let's say that I was building a solution that I deployed into somewhere that this solution contained an entity that was used in another solution where they had audit turned on, for instance, for that entity. Now, if I add my metadata and I have audit turned off, when I deploy that, guess what? Audit will automatically be turned off in that organization. And it's not sure that my customer would be very excited about that. So we're going to get rid of, we're still going to have the ability, but we're going to make sure that it's not marked by default. And there's also this magic button, add all assets. And the main rule should just be, there is no reason to add all assets unless it's a custom entity that you want to pull everything from. But there's really no good reason. I'd happy to talk about good reasons for that later, but I struggle coming up with one. Anyway, so let's say that I take my account here. I want to take just my default account form. Maybe I want to take a field. I just want to take account category code. Finish that. And I also want to add a custom field on that. So let's just say that this is my favorite coffee. Gonna save and close that. So remember that the default length for that field was 100 because that's what I want to show when I show how we change that later on from source. All right, so we've done that, all well and good. And what I want to do now is that I'm now professional IT, I'm a developer, and I want to, how do I get that to source and start building from it? If it wasn't because we offered these or will offer these Azure DevOps tasks, you would have to take this, you would have to export the solution, save it somewhere locally. Then you'd have to figure out there was a tool called Solution Packager that you would have to run to decipher this solution file. And then you'd have to move it to your source control, and then you could start doing something, and then you had to do the whole thing all over again. And it's all manual things, and it takes time, and it shifts focus from what you're doing. So that's what we tried to do, is just to like make it easier, make it simpler, make it faster. So what I've got here is I've got a couple of existing pipelines that I set up. But before we start using them, we could also say, well, the pipelines I've set up here, they demonstrate what I want to show. I'm going to take a solution. I'm going to put it into source. I'm actually going to create a repo as well. But just to illustrate what it's going to look like when we ship these things, that you can actually build your pipelines here. So I'm going to build a pipeline. I'm going to use just Azure repo git. I'm going to start with an empty job. And I can then start adding these PowerApps tasks that I'm going to have now. So I have PowerApps import, for instance. Right, so I have all these different things that I can now start consuming in my pipeline without having to worry about it. You have always been able to do this. You just had to figure it out yourself, that you needed to run this PowerShell and do that and do this and do that, right? So we just want to make it really straightforward for everybody to adopt this. It's worth saying, because I got this question as well, like, does that mean that I have to use Azure DevOps? You don't have to use Azure DevOps. We're going to make sure that this is all headless so that you can actually use other technologies if we want, but of course we want to encourage Azure DevOps because the end-to-end story is just that much easier to light up. Anyway, let's go back to our pipelines that are pre-configured. So I'm going to leave this one. So we call this one solution bootstrapping. It's basically just, I want to take something from an environment, I want to pull it out, I want to create a repo, and I want to use that as my source control for continued development. That's basically just to set up source control as well. So I am going to take this one. Actually, let's just take a quick look. Just going to show you what's in it. So it installs all these different tools. It exports the solution, it unpacks, creates the repo, clones the target repo, copy the files into it, and commit the solution to that target repo, right? So pretty straightforward stuff, but it's just nice to have it ready, set up. So I am gonna queue this up. And here I just have an input. We could automate all this, but it demos really bad to do things automatically, because then you don't see anything. So I'm gonna call it build 19 demo, I believe was the solution. I hope so. I'm gonna queue this one up. Let's take a look at that. Agent's getting ready for the job. So this is gonna take a little while. So it's a good time to take any questions if anyone has any. Yes, so what Peter is saying is that when you, and that's another one of those, we're trying to make it easier for you to not shoot you in the foot moving forward, that there is a bug that when you add a relationship to another entity, it actually doesn't just add the relationship, it adds everything, including the metadata for that one. So we're aware of that. I even think it has been fixed, but I fear that you might have run into it recently since you're asking. Okay, all right, yeah, but at least I know about it, and it is on our charter to get that fixed.
There's no need to use self-hosted agents, so the install SDK or
yeah, it installs all of it, everything. Yep. And that also means like that we make sure that this is kept up to date all the time, so you don't need to worry about all those things for you. Like if you're using these tasks, we're keeping them up to date. Okay, so it looks like we succeeded here. So what I can do now is that I can go into Visual Studio, and I can then use that repo that they just said, so I'm just gonna browse this one here. So I got my build 19 demo here. So what I did just for these demo purposes, I basically just set it up so that the repo that it creates is just the name of my solution along with the GUID. I'm going to clone that. Cool. So you can see now I have everything from my solution in my source here now, right? Without having to do so many weird different things in it. And what I can do now is I can say, well, these are the different things that was in my solution. Amongst them, the entities here on the account. So if I look at the definition of that entity here, eventually we should go down and be able to see this favorite coffee. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, so I got my favorite coffee field here and here. We can see that the max length of that field is 100 today. So what I could do, just to demonstrate something going the other way as well, I could change that to say, now it's 120, which is about the only thing you should be changing on entity metadata, is that you shouldn't be, exactly. Basically, our general message is that what you change in code is only what you use code to write, right? So from Visual Studio, whatever your favorite editor is, you update your plugins, your web resources, your PCF controls, but you don't create forms or fields or anything else, right? You're gonna do that in the Maker experience, is what we're driving people towards. We're gonna make it faster to move between those things. I'll talk about that a little later as well. So this is just for demonstration purposes. So I'm gonna go ahead and it's these updated field length. I'm gonna commit. I'm gonna save it. push it. And then normally I could just have that be the trigger of what I want to run. But again, it demos really bad when you when things just happen magically in the background. So I'm just going to do this solution deployment here. I'm going to edit it because I need to point it to the new repo that I created before. So I'm going to point it to there. Build 19 demo, this one. And again, this one installs the tool. It's super straightforward. Installs the tools, packs the solution, and imports the solution as well. So I'm going to save and queue that one. Looking at that again, so it's the same thing here. So it's just taking it, pushing it to another environment. So, well, it's not to another environment. This one, I'm actually just pushing it back to the same environment. But the idea here is, of course, that one of the variables that I have in my pipeline here generally is the different environments I have, right? So you'd set it up that it would now be pushed out to some test environment, maybe pushed out to a staging environment, and so forth, right? These different things. So let's see. Any other questions while that imports? Oh, so if you go through this, but then someone goes in and they update that entity as again, you do the same thing. You do the same thing, and I'll talk about that in a minute when it comes to magic buttons, because where you could really go with this, where it gets really powerful, is that you can start doing this in a more automated fashion. Maybe I'll talk about that in a minute. Because I'm demonstrating this by I'm going into Azure DevOps and I click buttons, right? That's really not what you want to do in CI/CD, right? You want that to be automated, but again, it just demos really bad that I'm not. So this is just to illustrate these different tasks that we're building and some of the sample pipelines that we're going to come out with. So that one has succeeded, and we're going to go back into a solution. We're going to go into a build 19 demo, and that field with the favorite coffee should be 120 now. Let's see. Yeah, so that's 120 now. So again, it's just to illustrate like this, like how quick it is to use that instead of all these different tools and other things that I was talking about before. I could actually also start somewhere else. So I showed how you do it in Maker, and then how you can harvest that, and then you can do something from code. But of course, you could also start from code to some extent. I don't know if any of you saw Peter and Hemant's demo before around how you build PCF controls and the Visual Studio 19 add-in. So that's just a really good way to like just generate that solution from code and push things in. So going back to the deck here, that was the demo. Now, what I started talking about before, but I didn't want to go too much into before the demo was over, that we have this concept of rainbows and unicorns on wonderful things that we want to do. And like my rainbow and unicorns on this one is like, well, now we know that we can sprinkle some DevOps on your PowerApps, but what if you could sprinkle PowerApps onto your DevOps? Wouldn't that be magic? So that's not what we're going to come out with at first, but it's something that we would really encourage you to start doing, right? Because you can hook into a publish event, for instance, and a publish event could trigger a flow, and flow happens to have an Azure DevOps connector, right? So that could effectively then trigger a pipeline to run and do something. So with this concept of moving towards easy buttons, it's not going to happen, you know, within the next 3 to 6 months. But what we want to get to is really a point where I can be a maker and know nothing about DevOps or about source control, about anything else, but somehow magically, when I create a new app, you know, we generate a repo, it's pushed to source, right? So the whole thing is just so much more structured than it is today. But before we can get there, we have to do this plumbing and make sure that we get it right. And we want to get these DevOps tasks out and these sample pipelines. We want to get them out, and we want to get feedback to understand, well, is this the right approach? Do we understand it? Do we get it? Are we getting it right? So we're working closely with the Azure DevOps team as well to get advice on this, like what should we be doing, and is this the right approach, and all these different things. But effectively, like, nothing would stop you from start rubbing PowerApps on your DevOps once we start shipping these different tasks. So I'd encourage you strongly to do that. Just simple things like deploy my changes to a downstream environment, right? Super straightforward. You click the button and you walk away. No more wait for the solution to export and then wait for it to import and see if you get any errors. And then if you get errors, you try again. Like all these different things. It's just about abstracting all these pieces. So in essence, where we're going is we want to do this concept of 5 minutes to start. I think we call it enable pro developers and makers alike to get set up with an environment with the latest build, source control enabled, and make a change in 5 minutes or less. That's not 5 minutes to make the change. It's 5 minutes from having nothing to actually have a development environment ready with everything from that I need to build my app, right? So that includes things like if you have dependent solutions from an ISV or dependent solutions from what we call our first-party apps, right? You don't have a way to deploy those through APIs today. We're lighting that up as well, so that can happen. But again, this is visionary, but it's concrete actions that we're taking. We want to simplify the tooling and speed up the inner loop. I talked about that as well. We want to enable an automated, repeatable, predictable deployment as well. And then we want to light up these additional environment management capabilities, make that faster, enable you to automatically deploy first-party, third-party apps to these environments. And again, like only if we do these different things can we get to a healthy state for ALM. Like the reason that so many do what we call solution hacking today, right, is because it takes such a long time to say, well, maybe I have these 3 different dependencies that I need as part of my code. But in order to get those 3 little things, I need to export a full solution that might take 20 minutes. Then I need to unpack it. Then I need to get that in. And then I get a lot of noise, like changes that are not real changes, but the change control it's telling me that I do have all these changes. So we're cleaning that up as well, where you actually only see what you have changed. For those of you that haven't worked with this before, there's a lot of noisy diffs is what we call them, that aren't real diffs. And then we want to invest more in monitor application telemetry and feedback loops by design. So we would really like to hear from you as we go through this. We were hoping that we would, be in a more shippable state when we were here today, so we could actually invite you to a preview program here now. We don't have that set up, so for now, get in touch if you want to be part of this. We'd love to hear from you. We really want to get it right. It's very dear to us. And with that, yep. So how does it work with solution patching? So we're going to light up tasks to do that as well, but we do recognize that the patching mechanism is not ideal today, and the whole construct of update versus upgrade is very confusing. We don't know exactly what we're going to do. We know that we need to address it, and whether it's going to be a patch generator tool, or it's going to be something in the solution system that's going to make it better. We're not 100% sure yet, but we know that it's an issue. Other questions? It doesn't work for on-premise initially, no. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question, but it's very specific to two use cases I worked with two clients. We were doing deployment almost every week. And the first situation is we were doing deployment to, we had the solution segmented. So we were doing deployment like full deployment.
Yep.
Solutions because to 3 or 4 solutions, so we were doing to all of them because when we do bug fixing, we were touching each one of those. So the deployment was taking about 4 hours, but it was following the ALM life cycle. On the other hand, with another client, we were doing differently. We were doing like a sprint by creating a new solution for that sprint and just adding what we need to do. Deployment was very fast, half an hour, it's done, sometimes 15 minutes. But the opposite side is UC solution, sprint 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yep.
Till this moment, I don't know what is the right approach, which one we take. One.
No, so the question is, what's the right approach in terms of solutions? Is it that I keep adding to the same solution? Exactly. Or is it that I keep building new solutions or using patching, if you want, right? Did you try and use patching as well or not?
No, we didn't do patching. We've been creating new solution for each sprint.
Yeah. So we're doing a lot of work. I was afraid I had too many slides, so I actually took one of them out. So this is what our team is doing is part of a larger initiative across 4 different teams. There's the administration experience team, there's the maker experience team, there's the platform team, and there's the team that I'm in, the ISV experience and tooling team. And what they're doing on the platform side is exactly addressing those things. Like we do a lot of unnecessary things when you import solutions, and some of the things that we do, they take just an unreasonable amount of time. Entities is fair enough that takes time to import, but the sitemap takes about the same effort as the entity import, which makes no sense. It's ludicrous. So what we're looking at is making sure that, well, if you import a solution and 99% of what's in that solution already exists in the target environment, then we're not going to throw through all those different things, so we're not going to slow you down. So the entire concept of import performance and these different things are very high on our charter as well. So in the near future, you should be able to simply just add on to that solution, not see that difference in it.
So once this gets fixed, the best approach is take the whole solution and the platform is going to take care of what's been already existed, and it's going to skip it, and it's going to add only the new.
Yep.
Instead of having them hundreds of solutions.
That's right. Yes. Ooh, I was I was surprised I didn't get that question. So the answer is yes, you can. There is the loving data migration tool or data configuration tool, if you want. It has different names. The problem with that has been, well, there's still a few problems beyond that, but the main problem when you talk about CI/CD is that it hasn't been headless. So we had all these different, you could actually put most of this together without the task that we're going to ship, except when it came to the data migration tool. So we're going to add headless support for that as well, so you can use that as in this as well. We are actually also, for full transparency, we are looking at other possible different ways of dealing with data, but we haven't 100% locked on a strategy yet. But we know that the data migration tool might not be the perfect tool to do it, so we're looking at different options for that.
Just thinking about the scenario, this guy painted with different solutions for each sprint. Would you not translate it into different repositories for every single sprint?
Not necessarily. Like what I demoed was just one way of doing it. That doesn't mean that you should have different repos for all those different solutions. That's really like that depends on how you want to structure it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so what I was showing when it came to the repo was just an example where I actually also create the repo as part of harvesting something and as part of the bootstrapping. You wouldn't have to do that, so we're going to ship different pipelines that does different things for you and addresses different scenarios. Yes. No, but I'm actually glad that you bring it up, because we haven't been, what's the term? I don't think that our messaging has been very clear. Dynamics 365 is a Power App, model-driven Power App delivered by Microsoft. That's all it is. So it is a Power App. It's a model-driven Power App. It's running on the Power Platform. It's just delivered by Microsoft, so it's labeled, it's branded Dynamics 365. But everything we do here applies to that as well. But good question. You're not the only one who wonders what's the difference between a PowerApps and Dynamics. But we're trying to be clearer on that, so hopefully that's the answer you're going to get from everyone moving forward.
We're actually seeing problems in that because they're moving stuff from the Dynamics platform, moving it into solutions. So the Power App is on there. They're moving stuff out into solutions, which actually is giving us problems other places. We have plugins running on sales orders.
Do you mind saying that again on the mic? Sure. Thank you.
So basically, Microsoft is moving stuff out from the Dynamics platform into solutions on a Power App. So that's basically what they're doing, but that's introducing problems for us. Some of the stuff we have on sales orders is that previously the code was in the platform. Now they moved that into solution. So the 2-minute limit I have on a plugin is now 63 seconds because they spend 57 seconds executing code. So basically, Power Apps is just the bottom layer for Dynamics. And that gives us some problems. So if you get that, raise support tickets.
Yeah,
Fix that.
the point was before we started splitting things out, like we're doing now, you could assume you made these assumptions on what was already there. Like there would be these, what is now the service and field service and sales and all these different things, right? That would always be an environment by default. So naturally, you would take dependencies on that, assuming that they'd be there. But now we're separating these things out, so there are some issues that customers run into because of that. But we need to get there to get proper separation out. So we're working through those as well. Are you getting help for what you're seeing? Okay, good. Any other questions? Thank you.